It might just be easier to see. Okay.
All right, can you guys see it full screen?
Let's see.
For a second I could.
Yeah, it's still kind of
In and out.
I mean, it's readable, but it has all the other PowerPoint stuff. It's not just the slide presentation.
Yeah, it's looking, it looks like the, when you're in creating it,
Editing it.
all the options at the top.
I can see it.
Yeah, I mean, we can see it. It's readable, so we can do that.
So
What
am I
about-
going to just...
What about now?
That's perfect.
Yeah, that's better.
Great. Okay.
So if there are notes at the bottom, like when it says add notes for speaker, I did put some notes at the bottom of mine. I won't be able to see those, right?
Not when it's
I
in
can't.
this view, no.
Okay. That's probably fine. That's probably fine.
Okay. So just let me know when you guys want to start.
Okay. I'm ready.
I'm ready. I'm ready. Okay. Do we have a group number?
I'm sure we
I
do.
actually don't know.
Okay, that's okay. Okay, we will be covering gender-based violence in the Mela camp in Thailand. An intervention plan for empowering refugee women, and we are the Sisters for Safe Camps. Next slide. And onto the problem.
Okay, so the problem that we've chosen to address is the sexual and gender-based violence that it's really common within a lot of refugee camps. It's also referred to as SGBV. And according to the UNCHR, sexual and gender-based violence refers to any act that is perpetuated against a person's will and is based on gender norms, unequal power relationships. It includes physical, emotional, psychological, and sexual violence, as well as denial of resources and access to services. So among the many health disparities that refugees are faced with today, this is probably one of the most disturbing, is the sexual and gender-based violence against these women. And a lot of it is allegedly committed by the paramilitary personnel and soldiers that are residing in the camps, as well as within the refugee groups themselves. So this kind of violence seems to be trending among a lot of refugee camps. And we're going to be focusing specifically on the Mela camp in Thailand. And so a lot of this violence goes unnoticed and unreported. And a lot of this is because people in the culture tend to keep it private for a lot of various reasons. Some cultures find it like a disgrace to the family. A lot of refugees feel like there's nothing they can really do to change it. A lot of women feel like they don't really have a way out because sometimes that's the only way that they can be assured food and resources. And then a lot of these women have just gotten to the point where they feel like that's just how life is, and it's just going to happen, and they just expect it. So a lot of these women just look at it as it's not a matter of if the violence will happen, but more when the violence will happen. So there's clearly a problem here. Next slide.
Okay, a little background on the Mela camp. So there are actually 7 refugee camps, 7 major refugee camps along the Thai-Burmese border. Mela is the largest of these camps. Over 140,000 Karen refugees have fled to this area after the Myanmar military forces burned down their villages and murdered their people. The Thailand-Burma Consortium speculates that food and resources in this camp supply 38,000 refugees. Now, it's unfortunate because it is estimated that between 40,000 and 80,000 people seek refuge in this camp. This shortage of food and resources create an extreme desperation among refugees, resulting in theft, bribery, abuse, and sexual crimes towards women. These numbers are discouraging as the refugees are completely reliant on outside assistance for food, shelter, protection, and other basic needs. Women in particular are faced with an increased desperation as they are often raped and abused in the camp. Combined with emotional abuse and depression, their coping mechanisms are severely damaged. The social injustice and abuse rendered have decreased the overall self-sufficiency of these women. Also, it's created a climate where refugees tend to think only short-term from one ration to another. Some refugees have adapted this form of thinking already back in Burma, where they were forced to flee the attacks and hide from one place to another. When the refugees will eventually return to Burma, many of them will need assistance not only in skills to sustain themselves, but also in changing the way they think from short-term survival to long-term development. According to CDC, the brutality of such sexual violences has resulted in unprecedented rates of trauma, physical injury, including fistula, pregnancy, infertility, genital mutilation, and HIV and AIDS, and many other sexually transmitted diseases. And this is an image of a pregnant woman. She's having some type of an ultrasound performed on her. And looking at this picture, we wonder if she was raped, and if she does have, maybe a potential STD. Next slide.
So our solution. We have come up with a few different things as far as our solution. First off, we want to have health education programs through the existing Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Committee in the Maylaw camp. So education regarding the risks associated with sexual violence against refugee women. We want to use pamphlets as a means of distribution of materials. This includes the spread of HIV and AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases. These affect not only the women, but the perpetrators of violence as well. So we feel that the education of everyone is essential to the understanding of what is the outcome of this sexual and gender-based violence. So the UN Refugee Agency reports that there was a 66% increase in incidences of reported rape from 2011 to 2012 in refugee camps. So that is just reported rape. As we had mentioned earlier, a lot of times these things are not being reported, and these women look at these things as just being their normal everyday life. We also want to do some leadership and ambassador training. By working closely with leadership and ambassadors at the local camp level, we will be able to implement training to assist them in dealing with sexual and gender-based violence. This will be a very boots on the ground type of implementation, as it is vital for us to get those that are already there in the camp or those who have lived in the camp and have lived through this type of violence. So we need to have systems to identify those at risk of the violence in order to provide additional resources. Then we want to have preventative measures to aid those at risk. We also need, as we talked about earlier, we need to identify individuals who would be good ambassadors. As I said, these could be people who live at the camp and who have gone through the violence, or those who have since left the camp who are interested in coming back and helping.
This is an example of one of the posters that we have created. You'll notice that we've highlighted the word violence because we want to send the message that that it is a violent act, what is happening to them, and it's not something that they should expect in their daily life and just adapt to. Um, Sexual violence hurts, sexual violence can spread diseases, and sexual violence interferes with education and growth of especially the women and the girls in these camps and in these cultures. And so that is the main message that we have. And then along the right-hand side, we're giving suggestions for how they can do this. Some ways that we suggest are for them to stay in groups and not be alone, to stay in areas that are well lit, to not go to the restrooms alone, and to do chores such as getting water, gathering firewood, and so forth, to do that in groups in an effort to protect them. And we also encourage them to speak with their leaders in their community there for support, and hope that that will help them, because there are probably going to be a lot of ramifications for people who speak up on this really sensitive subject that is kind of being culturally accepted there at present. Next slide. So this is our baby here. We have found a connection. One of our team here, Sarah, knew someone that was able to help us to translate this. So we think this is a beautiful poster here that's in a language that the people could actually use. Next slide.
So we also want to establish a MELA Refugee Governing Board training. So we want to coordinate with the Community for Coordination of Services to Displaced Persons in Thailand, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and various global volunteer organizations. We want to help mentor, educate, and prepare our refugee-appointed ambassadors like we spoke about before. So our coordination and communication. So as Sisters for Safe Camp, we will be in regular communication with the 20 international and local NGOs who actively observe camp activity and management. They will survey the population and provide us with current statistics regarding abuse towards women. These NGOs provide our organization with appropriate feedback of our educational methods and health conditions. Through a combined effort, we will share regular updates and needs assessments to the committee to coordinate services for displaced persons in Thailand. So how would we go about implementing this? So we talked about what we want to do a little bit. So now we want to have this refugee governing board, and we want to have various leadership positions. So first off, we want to have a self-reliance and entrepreneurship ambassador. We want to educate women in alternative livelihoods and entrepreneurship in order to prevent survival sex. So a lot of times, as we had mentioned, the women, they look at this as their everyday lives because they have no other options. We want to try to show them other options and create other ways for them to survive without having to perform sexual acts. We also want to have a women's health ambassador. We want to be able to educate the population on the risks associated with the sexual violence and the transmission of HIV and AIDS. Our last one here is an ambassador of a temporary safe house. So we want to design and operate multiple safety huts throughout the camp. These huts will serve as a temporary safe haven for victims of the violence. A lot of times it is not spoken about, and when a woman does speak up, many times she can be shunned and she can be denied even more resources. So we want to help her have a safe place to go in order to get away from this violence. So why will our intervention solve the problem? We want to involve female refugees. We don't want this to be something that is strictly done by an outsider or by the men in the camp. So the UN states that placing women in leadership roles will represent the interest of the women in the camp. These women can serve as ambassadors and mentors for all women, and especially adolescent females. In many camps, the leadership structure is dominated by male refugees. It is important that the involvement of more female leaders be encouraged and the role and responsibilities of women be broadened and strengthened. The establishment of refugee women's committees and groups is important to represent the interests of the women in the camp, and that UNHCR should play an active role in promoting this.
The potential barriers to us being able to implement our program are, next slide, the fact that gender-based sexual violence is a weapon that's used in war. So as long as there are people that are fighting to get power one over the other, sexual violence is very likely to continue. So that's a huge barrier. We have a quote here from a Harvard magazine, quote, "No woman or girl is safe in a refugee camp because rape is a weapon for war and power." And let's, for the sake of time, let's go to the next slide. UNICEF is another organization that works with refugees, and they describe the following as things that are happening ongoing in numerous refugee camps, unfortunately. So I'll quote that: sexual attack, coercion, extortion by persons in authority, sexual abuse of children who've been separated in foster care, domestic violence, sexual assault when in transit facilities, collecting wood, water, etc., sex for survival, forced prostitution, sexual exploitation of persons seeking legal status in an asylum country or access to assistance and resources, resumption of harmful traditional practices. So that list again is from the UNICEF Foundation. In most refugee camps, there are not gender separate facilities, which leaves women and girls very vulnerable to being raped. And we've mentioned several times that the women don't report abuse because of the ramifications of it, being shunned, yes, but also if they do have a husband, that is considered a justification in a lot of cultures for the man to leave that woman, even though it wasn't her fault at all that she was raped. She will be left alone. Her man will leave her. And also, the people in power, they do so much and stay under the radar, while refugee people go missing, either sold in human trafficking or murdered if they're causing trouble. And like I said, the perpetrators of these crimes, they never get caught. These things never get investigated. So that's extremely sad. Next slide. Potential concerns. Someone might have these kinds of concerns about implementing our educational female empowering intervention. Next slide. One concern might be that the people that are the abusers have power, and so the fear of punishment is huge. The second is that the women and the girls are in the process of trying to flee violence, and if they complain and cause an issue, then it can disrupt their process of escape. So sometimes they just put up with it so that hopefully they can keep moving along their path and get to some safe place eventually. Third, it's definitely a cultural thing in most of the refugee camps that men are expected to be the protectors, and so it's just culturally not accepted for a woman to stand up and a woman to protect herself against a man. So that's would be a huge concern. Next slide.
Okay, so for our funding plan, in our research, we've discovered quite a few different organizations that are available to help women refugees. And a lot of them generate their own funding through donations and gifts given to fund the continuation of the program. So the Refugee Women's Alliance, or REWA, is one of those examples. It gives people options to donate in amounts that vary from $25 up to $1,000, or it also gives them the option to choose an alternative amount, anything that they can afford. So after this, they have the option to donate to the general fund or choose the program to which their donation will be given, such as behavioral health, domestic and sexual abuse, or family empowerment, things such as that. Another program that has made great strides by using donations from the public is the Outreach Institute. They offer sexual and reproductive care to disadvantaged women throughout the world through education, and public analysis. Much of their focus is on advocacy for these women. To donate to this program, individuals are also given the opportunity to donate anywhere from $100 to $1,000. And they can either do that in a one-time donation or recurring donations that happen monthly. Next slide. Okay, so there are also grants that are available for interventions such as the one that Sisters for Safe Camps have been planning. And it's clear that a lot of these organizations benefit greatly and are able to achieve their purposes through the generous donations of others. However, oftentimes it's not quite enough for specific programs, especially for cases like Sisters for Safe Camps, where we're a new program, we're just starting up. We might need additional funds to cover startup costs, to get our purpose out there, to spread the word about what we're trying to accomplish. So this is where grants become really important. There's a lot of grants available that are not only geared towards international education and refugee relief, but also more specifically for funding work against gender-based violence. And the Humanitarian Innovation Fund is one such program. They offer specific grants for addressing gender-based violence. It offers grants for 75,000 euros up to 150,000 euros for programs that are still in the development phase. They also offer grants for the same amounts for those programs who are also in the implementation phase. So there are specific requirements for this specific grant that applicants need to fit, such as it has to be a humanitarian project, it needs to be innovative, and there are certain experiential criteria to be eligible for the grant. So you have to have someone on your team who knows kind of what they're doing, they've done it before. They just want to make sure that their funds are going to a program that's going to be effective and make a real difference. Next slide. And then our final funding determination for Sisters for Safe Camps. Professionally speaking, it would be best for us to seek out grant funding to cover our research and our startup costs and training for ambassadors and all of that. And then when the program is finally up and running and able to maintain itself, Sisters for Safe Camps would have the opportunity to reevaluate our needs. And based on our findings, we would be able to determine whether funding from another grant is needed, or if we are established enough that we could implement an aid donation program, such as those listed in the previous programs that we discussed. Next slide.
So there is no tool for development more effective than the empowerment of women. And here's our references.